In the golden glow of the Met Opera, a lavish inheritance had a cruel condition. If the janitor played better than the maestro, he would marry her. Amidst laughs and sneering glances, a man with a past as a pianist took his seat. What followed wasn't just music. It was the first note of a truth that could change everything. The echo of the applause was fading slowly in the elegant ballroom of the Hilton Grand Central in New York City when James Anderson felt his world crumbling. His hands, which had once danced on the piano keys with the grace of a poet writing love verses, now trembled while holding the letter he had just received. The black ink on official white paper confirmed what he already suspected. The bank had foreclosed on the small music academy he had inherited from his grandmother, Grace. At 32, James had everything he could lose and nothing he could gain. His face, marked by pronounced cheekbones and a firm jaw that spoke of determination even in defeat, twisted into a grimace of pain. His green eyes, the color of the oak leaves that grew in his childhood backyard, now gleamed with held-back tears. His slightly wavy black hair fell over his sweaty forehead as he reread the lines that sealed his failure over and over again. "Mr. Anderson," the cold professional voice of the bank manager echoed behind him. "I regret the circumstances, but the policies are clear. You have 48 hours to vacate the property." James didn't turn around. He couldn't. His broad back, shaped by years of physical work to supplement the meager income from his piano lessons, hunched slightly under the weight of the humiliation. The suit he had bought at a thrift store for this meeting, naively hoping that a more formal appearance could convince the bank to give him an extension, now felt like a cruel disguise. The Grace Notes Academy had been more than a business. It had been his refuge after the tragedy that changed his life forever. 3 years ago, when he was still recognized as one of the most promising pianists in the United States, a car accident had taken his wife, Sarah, and left him with an injury to his right hand that ended his career as a concert pianist. The doctors had told him he could still play, but never again with the technical perfection required at the professional level he had reached. "My grandmother once told me that music was like love," James murmured, more to himself than to the manager waiting for an answer. "That even when it hurts, it's still beautiful." The manager cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sir, I need you to sign these surrender documents." James finally turned around, and the bank man took a step back at the sight of that intense green gaze that had seduced audiences at Carnegie Hall and now burned with a mix of pain and dignity. Tall, at 6 feet, his stature commanded respect, even in defeat. James reached out to take the papers. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything twice?" he asked, as he signed with a handwriting that betrayed the trembling of his fingers. "The first time, you think you can rebuild. The second, you learn that maybe you didn't deserve to have it in the first place." It was at that moment of absolute vulnerability that fate decided to mock him one more time. The door to the ballroom burst open with a bang that made every head turn. She entered like a storm dressed in silk, heels clacking against the marble with the precision of a metronome, and a presence that filled the space with an undeniable, electric energy. Samantha Taylor was 28 years old and had the world at her feet. Heiress to the largest hotel empire on the East Coast, CEO of Taylor Luxury Resorts, and known as much for her beauty as for her ruthless reputation in business. Her light brown hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, framing a face with delicate features and skin that seemed to have been kissed by the sun of the Hamptons. But it was her blue eyes, the color of the sky over the Atlantic in the middle of summer, that captured the attention of anyone who looked at her. Cold as ice, but with sparks that suggested hidden fires. "Pardon the interruption," Samantha said, her voice clear and authoritative, filling the silence. She was wearing a navy blue dress that cost more than most people's annual salary, and she knew it. "I'm looking for Mr. James Anderson." James felt as if the air had thickened. "I am James Anderson." The blue eyes scanned him up and down, evaluating him as if he were a piece of furniture she was considering buying. "Perfect. I have a proposition for you." The bank manager, clearly intimidated by the presence of one of the most powerful women in the region, cleared his throat. "Ms. Taylor, we're in the middle of a private meeting." "Not anymore," Samantha interrupted, without even looking at him. Her eyes remained fixed on James, studying every line of his face as if she were reading a complex contract. "Mr. Anderson is coming with me." James felt a mix of confusion and wounded pride. "Excuse me, but I don't think we've met before, and I'm sure I have no pending business with you." For the first time, Samantha smiled, and that smile had the sharp elegance of a razor blade. "We met 3 days ago in the lobby of my hotel. You were—" She paused dramatically, cleaning the windows. The silence that followed was deafening. James felt the blood rush to his cheeks. vividly remembering that moment of humiliation. He had taken that temporary job to try and earn some extra money, hoping no one would recognize him. Apparently, he had failed spectacularly. "Ah," he murmured, lowering his gaze. "Yes, I work in housekeeping. And very poorly, by the way," Samantha added with a casual cruelty that made James clench his fists. "But that's not what's important. What's important is that I heard you humming while you worked. A beautiful melody, complex, original." James looked at her in surprise. "You heard me humming? Not just that, I followed you. I saw you sit down at the lobby piano when you thought no one was watching." Her voice softened slightly, but her eyes remained cold. For 3 minutes, that lobby was transformed into a concert hall. Guests stopped walking. Employees stopped working. Everyone stopped to listen. James's heart began to beat faster. He didn't know if it was hope or terror he was feeling. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Samantha walked toward him, her heels marking each step like a countdown. When she was close enough for him to smell her perfume, an intoxicating mix of jasmine and something indefinably expensive, she stopped. "I want to hire you. Not to clean windows, obviously, but to play. At the grand opening of my new hotel in Newport next month. A private recital for my most important investors." James felt the ground move under his feet. "Ma'am, I think there's a misunderstanding. I am not a professional pianist. Not anymore, at least." "Oh, really?" Samantha's smile became sharper. "Then I suppose James Anderson, the pianist who won the National Classical Music Competition 3 times in a row, must be someone else." Silence stretched between them like an abyss. James realized she had done her research, which was equally impressive and terrifying. "That person died 3 years ago," James said finally, his voice heavy with pain, "on a highway near Albany, along with everything that was ever important to him." For the first time since she had entered the room, Samantha seemed to show something resembling humanity. Her eyes softened slightly, and for a moment, James could see through the mask of professional coolness. "People don't die completely," she said softly. "Sometimes they just hide for a while." James felt something stir in his chest, something that had been dormant for so long he had forgotten it existed. Hope. Dangerous, tempting, painful hope. "Why me?" he asked. "There are thousands of pianists in this country who could do that job better than me." "Because," Samantha said, stepping back and regaining her cool composure, "none of them have the story you have. None of them have lost everything and found a way to keep making music. That's what my investors need to hear. That's what they need to feel." James stared at her, trying to decipher what was behind those words. "Is this just a marketing strategy for you?" The question seemed to hit her like a slap, but she recovered quickly. "Everything is marketing, Mr. Anderson. The difference is whether the final product has real value or not." The bank manager, who had been watching this exchange with increasing discomfort, cleared his throat again. "Ms. Taylor, Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I still need these documents signed." "How much?" Samantha asked abruptly, turning to the manager. "Pardon?" "The debt. How much does he owe?" James felt his pride rise like a giant wave. "I don't need your charity." "I'm not offering charity," Samantha retorted without looking at him. "I'm making an investment. If I want you to play for my investors, I need you to have a place to practice. Besides," she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "when you finish working for me, you can pay me back with interest." The manager, clearly overwhelmed by the events, stammered, It's $250,000 plus accrued interest." Samantha pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Maria, it's Samantha. I need you to transfer $300,000 to..." She looked at the manager, waiting for a response. "National Bank of America Special Collections Account." As Samantha dictated the bank details, James stood paralyzed. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Not to him. "Done," Samantha said, putting away her phone. "The transfer should be in your system in less than an hour." She turned to James, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes he couldn't identify. Vulnerability, perhaps, or fear. "Now," she said, "do you accept my proposition?" James looked at her, aware that he was standing on the edge of a cliff. He could say no, keep his pride intact, and return to his day-to-day life of survival. Or he could jump into the abyss, trusting that this mysterious and seemingly cruel woman would not let him fall. "I have conditions," he said finally. Samantha's eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect. "I'm listening. First, this is a professional contract. I don't accept charity, and I will pay back every penny." "Agreed." "Second, I choose the pieces I'm going to play. Within reason." "Agreed." "And third," James paused, surprising himself with what he was about to say, If you expect me to play for your investors like a trained monkey, you have the wrong person. I'm a musician, not a spectacle." For the first time since she had entered the room, Samantha laughed. It was a genuine, warm laugh, completely different from the cold persona she had shown until then. "Mr. Anderson," she said, extending her hand to shake his, "I think this is going to be a very interesting month." When their hands touched, James felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with static electricity. Samantha's blue eyes met his, and for a moment, time stood still. But the moment broke when she withdrew her hand and returned to her professional composure. "I'll send you the contract details tomorrow. We start rehearsals next week." Without another word, she headed for the door, her heels marking a rhythm that would be engraved in James's memory long after she had gone. At the door, she stopped and turned one last time. "Oh, and James, it's wear something better for our rehearsals. If you're going to work with me, you need to look like you belong in the same world I do." And with that, she disappeared, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and unanswered questions. James stood in the center of the ballroom, holding the documents he would no longer have to sign, wondering if he had just made the best or the worst deal of his life. The bank manager, clearly relieved not to have to complete another foreclosure, smiled nervously. "Well, Mr. Anderson, it looks like your problems are solved." James looked toward the door where Samantha had disappeared, feeling that his problems, in reality, were just beginning. But wasn't that exactly what his dormant heart needed to beat again? Chapter 2. The Taylor Mansion in the hills of New York was everything James had imagined and more. Surrounded by gardens that seemed to have been designed by gods, with a panoramic view of the city that stretched to the horizon, the property screamed wealth and power from every perfectly designed angle. As his old sedan drove up the stone driveway, James couldn't help but feel like an intruder in a world that wasn't his. 5 days had passed since their meeting at the hotel, and in that time, James had lived through a whirlwind of emotions that had left him exhausted. The academy had been saved, at least temporarily, but now he had a debt to the most intimidating woman he had ever met. The contract that had arrived by messenger was surprisingly generous in financial terms, but the clauses were specific and demanding. 6 hours of daily rehearsal for 3 weeks, 2 private performances before the main event, and a clause that prohibited him from talking to the press about any details of the contract. He parked his car between a silver Mercedes-Benz and a black BMW, feeling more aware than ever of the class differences. He had put on his best white shirt and a pair of dress pants he had bought with part of the advance Samantha had insisted on giving him, but he still felt inadequate. The front door opened before he had a chance to knock. An older woman, impeccably dressed in a housekeeper's uniform, greeted him with a warm smile. "You must be Mr. Anderson. I'm Carmen, the housekeeper. Miss Taylor is waiting for you in the music room." James followed Carmen through hallways adorned with art that was probably worth more than his house. The walls were covered with family photographs showing the Taylors at various social events, world travels, and award ceremonies. In several of them, he recognized Samantha at different stages of her life, a serious little girl in expensive dresses, an elegant teenager at charity galas, a young woman receiving business awards. "Has she always been so intense?" James asked, discreetly pointing to a photo where Samantha, in her early 20s, was cutting the ribbon at a hotel opening. Carmen laughed softly. "Miss Taylor has had to grow up fast. When her father passed away 5 years ago, she was barely 23 and had to take control of the entire family empire. It hasn't been easy for her." James stopped. He hadn't known that Samantha had lost her father so young. Suddenly, her professional coolness began to take on a new meaning. "Here we are," Carmen announced, opening the double-carved mahogany doors. The music room was spectacular. It had high ceilings with wooden beams, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the gardens, and in the center, like a precious jewel, was a Steinway grand piano that gleamed under the natural light. James felt his breath catch in his throat. "Impressive, isn't it?" Samantha's voice came from the other end of the room. She was standing next to a table full of sheet music, dressed more casually than the last time he had seen her, but no less stunning. She was wearing form-fitting black pants and a white silk blouse that highlighted the blue of her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail that exposed the elegant curve of her neck. "It's beautiful," James murmured, approaching the piano as if it were a sacred object. "It was my mother's piano," Samantha said, her voice softening slightly. "She was a concert pianist before she married my father. I always dreamed of learning to play like her, but—" She shrugged. "I never had time." James gently ran his fingers over the keys without pressing them, feeling the perfect texture of the polished surface. "What happened to your mother?" "Cancer. When I was 17, Samantha walked toward the piano, stopping on the opposite side. After that, my father never allowed anyone to touch this piano again, until now. There was something in her voice, a carefully controlled vulnerability, that made James look at her with new eyes. For the first time, he saw beyond the mask of power and coldness. "Why now?" he asked softly. Samantha's eyes met his across the piano. "Because I think my mother would have wanted someone who truly understands music to bring her piano back to life." The moment was charged with an unexpected intimacy. James felt something stir in his chest, something both dangerous and beautiful. "We should begin," Samantha said, breaking the spell and returning to her professional tone. "I have a meeting at 3. James nodded, opened the piano lid, and sat down on the bench. His fingers found the keys, and the first chord resonated through the room like an awakening. The sound was perfect, rich and complex, better than any piano he had played in years. "What do you want me to play?" he asked. "Surprise me." James closed his eyes and let his fingers find a melody. Without consciously planning it, he began to play a piece he had composed years ago, inspired by the sunsets over the Hudson River that he used to share with Sarah. The music flowed from him like dammed water that finally finds a crack in the dam. When he opened his eyes, Samantha was sitting in a nearby chair, watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Her eyes were gleaming, but her posture remained rigid, controlled. "That's not a classical piece," she said when he finished. "It's my own composition. It's beautiful. Sad but beautiful." She got up and walked toward the window. "Does it have to do with your wife?" The question hit him like a punch. "How do you know about Sarah?" "I told you I did my research." Samantha didn't turn around, keeping her gaze fixed on the gardens. "I'm sorry for your loss." James felt a mix of anger and pain. "What else do you know about me? What's my favorite color? What did I have for breakfast this morning? I know you were 21 when you got married, that she was a first-grade teacher, that you were trying to have a baby when she passed away." Samantha finally turned, and in her eyes there was something James didn't expect. Understanding. "And I know you stopped composing after the accident." "Why?" James's voice came out hoarse, heavy with emotion. "Why do you need to know all that?" "Because I need to understand what motivates the people I work with." Samantha walked slowly to the piano. "Because the music you just played, that music comes from a place you can't fake, and that's exactly what I need for my event." James got up from the bench, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "I'm not your trained monkey, Samantha. I can't play my pain for your investors' entertainment." "I'm not asking you to." Her voice softened, and for the first time since he had known her, James saw a crack in her armor. "I'm asking you to teach me." "Teach you what?" "To play." James looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "What?" "You heard right. I want to learn to play the piano." Samantha sat down on the bench where he had been sitting moments before. "I have 3 weeks. I don't expect to become a concert pianist, but I want to be able to play something meaningful." "Why?" Samantha was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming nervously on the keys without making a sound. "Because my mother wrote me a letter before she passed away. A letter I didn't open until recently. In it, she asked me to learn to play her favorite song so I could feel like she was still with me." The revelation hit James like a wave. Suddenly, all of Samantha's coldness, her need for control, her way of keeping people at a distance, made sense. "What's the song?" he asked softly. "Clair de Lune by Debussy." James nodded slowly. It was a beautiful piece, but technically complex. "It's difficult for a beginner." "Impossible." "Not impossible, but it will require work." Samantha looked him directly in the eyes. "Will you teach me?" There was something in the way she asked the question, a vulnerability that contrasted completely with the powerful woman who had burst into the hotel a week ago. James felt something shifting between them, moving them into unknown and dangerous territory. "Okay," he said finally, "but if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. No half measures." The following days settled into a strange and intimate routine. James arrived every morning at 9 and found Samantha waiting for him in the music room with freshly brewed coffee and a determination that impressed him. They had agreed to split the time, 3 hours for him to rehearse the pieces for the event and 3 hours for her lessons. The first lessons were torturous. Samantha, accustomed to mastering everything she set her mind to, became easily frustrated with the difficulty of coordinating her hands. Her fingers, perfect for signing contracts and handling tablets, seemed to rebel against the demands of the piano. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed after trying to play a basic scale for the 10th time. "The notes don't sound the way they're supposed to." "Because you're trying to force it," James said, coming up behind her. "Music can't be controlled like a business. You have to let it flow." "I don't know how to do that." "Let it flow. Stop controlling." James put his hands over hers, guiding her fingers over the keys. He could feel the tension in her muscles, the resistance to letting go. "Breathe," he murmured, aware of how close he was to her, of the scent of her perfume, of the warmth of her body. "Feel the music before you play it." Samantha closed her eyes, and slowly, James felt her resistance begin to give way. Her fingers softened under the guidance of his, and for the first time she managed to play a full scale without errors. "I did it!" she cried, turning to him with a smile that completely transformed her face. It was the first time James had seen her smile genuinely, without calculation or coldness, and the sight took his breath away. In that moment, she wasn't the powerful heiress of a hotel empire. She was just a woman who had accomplished something she thought was impossible. "Yes, you did," James said, surprised by the hoarseness of his own voice. They looked into each other's eyes, and James realized that something had irrevocably changed between them. They were no longer just the boss and the employee. They were two people who shared something intimate, the vulnerability of learning, the beauty of music, the closeness of bodies moving in unison. We should continue with the lesson," Samantha murmured, but she didn't move away. "Yes," James agreed, but he didn't move either. The moment was broken when Carmen appeared at the door with more coffee, discreetly clearing her throat to announce her presence. Samantha and James quickly separated, both aware that something had happened, but neither willing to name it. The following weeks developed their own rhythm. In the mornings, James worked on his own pieces, gradually losing the anxiety he had felt about playing professionally again. Samantha's mother's piano responded to him like an instrument that had been patiently waiting to be awakened. His technique, although rusty, began to return, and more importantly, he began to feel the passion he thought he had lost forever. The afternoons belonged to Samantha's lessons. Day by day, she progressed, and day by day, James discovered new layers of the woman behind the business mask. He discovered she had a dry sense of humor that appeared at the most unexpected times. He discovered that her determination, while sometimes frustrating, was also admirable. And he discovered that when she concentrated on the music, a serenity descended upon her that transformed her into someone completely different. "My father used to say that music was a waste of time," she confessed one afternoon while they were practicing a particularly difficult section of Clair de Lune. "He said it was a distraction from the truly important things." "And what do you think?" James asked. Samantha played the first notes of the piece, this time without errors. "I think the most important things are the ones that connect us to who we really are, not who we're supposed to be." It was these kinds of comments that made James realize he was falling in love with her, slowly but inexorably. It wasn't just her beauty, although she was undeniably beautiful. It was her intelligence, her determination, the way her face softened when she played a perfect note, the vulnerability she showed only when she thought no one was watching. But he also realized the barriers that existed between them. Samantha never spoke about her personal life beyond occasional anecdotes about her childhood or her family. James knew from Carmen that she had had a serious boyfriend until last year, a businessman from Boston who had broken off the engagement when he realized he would never be more important to Samantha than her business empire. "Ms. Taylor has been alone ever since," Carmen had confessed one day while serving him coffee. "I think she convinced herself it's better that way." James understood that mentality. He himself had reached the same conclusion after Sarah's death. Love hurt too much when it was lost. It was safer to keep one's distance, to protect one's heart from more harm. But music had a way of breaking down the most carefully built defenses. One afternoon, 2 weeks into the lessons, Samantha managed to play Clair de Lune all the way through for the first time. It wasn't perfect. There were some missed notes, some slightly off rhythms, but it was genuine, emotional, full of the love she felt for the mother she had lost. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes. "She would have been proud," James murmured. "Do you think so?" "I'm sure of it." Samantha turned to him, and for the first time since he had known her, James saw tears running freely down her cheeks. "I haven't cried since she passed. Sometimes we need to find the safe place before we can allow ourselves to feel. Is that what I am to you? A safe place?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities and dangers. James realized they were standing on the brink of something that would change everything. "Samantha," he began, but she got up abruptly from the bench. "We should end for today. I have a video conference in 20 minutes. And just as she had come into his life like a storm, she moved away from him like one, leaving him alone in the music room with the echo of the notes of Clair de Lune and the certainty that, no matter what happened, he could no longer pretend this was just work. But how could a man who had lost everything dare to love a woman who had everything to lose? Chapter 3. The preliminary showcase event had been scheduled for a Friday night at the Taylor residence. Samantha had invited a select group of potential investors, business partners, and members of New York high society for what she called a private preview of the talent she would present at the big Newport grand opening. James arrived that night feeling a mix of nerves and excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Over the past 3 weeks, he had rediscovered his passion for music, but he had also discovered something much more dangerous: his growing attraction to Samantha. The daily lessons had created an intimacy between them that went far beyond the professional relationship they had initially agreed upon. The mansion's main living room had been transformed into a makeshift concert hall. Elegant chairs formed a semicircle around the grand piano, and soft lighting created an intimate and sophisticated atmosphere. The guests, dressed in the casual elegance that only old money can afford, conversed in low tones while holding glasses of champagne and canapes of salmon. James, dressed in a tuxedo that Samantha had insisted on buying for him, "It's an investment in the presentation," she had said, felt as if he were acting in a play where he didn't fully know his part. "Nervous?" Carmen asked, appearing at his side with a glass of water. "Terrified," James admitted. "It's been 3 years since I played for an audience." "Ms. Taylor is more nervous than you are," Carmen said with a conspiratorial smile. "I've seen her change her dress 3 times." As if she had been summoned, Samantha appeared at the entrance to the room, and James felt his breath catch. She was wearing a navy blue dress that flowed like water over her curves, and her hair fell in soft waves over her bare shoulders. But it was her expression that truly captured his attention. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, as if she too were acting in an unknown play. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, the noise of the conversations faded. James felt that electric connection that had been growing between them for weeks, amplified by the anticipation of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samantha's clear voice cut through the murmur of conversations, "if you could please take your seats, I'd like to introduce someone very special tonight." The guests settled into their chairs, and James felt the weight of their evaluative gazes. He recognized some of them from the social pages of newspapers: powerful businessmen, heirs to family fortunes, influential politicians. It was exactly the kind of audience that would have intimidated him in the past. "Tonight," Samantha continued, "we have the honor of hearing from James Anderson, one of the most talented pianists in the country. Some of you may remember him from his performances at Carnegie Hall before he decided to take a break from the stage." The way she said break, as if it had been a voluntary choice and not a catastrophe that had destroyed his life, caused James a pang of something he couldn't quite identify. Gratitude for the delicacy, pain at the need to lie. "James will be joining us for the grand opening of our new hotel in Newport next month, but tonight we have been fortunate enough to persuade him to offer us a preview of what you can expect." Polite applause filled the room as James walked toward the piano. He sat on the bench, adjusted his position, and for a moment, the familiarity of the ritual restored his confidence. His fingers found the keys, and he began with the first piece he had chosen, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The music flowed from him like breath, natural and necessary. The first few bars were shaky. He could feel the weight of the audience's attention, the pressure of expectations. But gradually the beauty of the piece enveloped him, and he lost himself in the world that only music could create. When the first movement ended, he risked a look at the audience. The faces he saw reflected genuine attention, some even emotion, but it was Samantha he really wanted to look at, and when he did, he found her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that almost made him miss the next chord. There was something in her expression, pride, yes, but also something deeper, more personal, that made him feel as if they were alone in the room, as if this whole performance was just for her. Inspired by that look, James moved on to the second piece. The original composition he had played for Samantha on the first day of their lessons, the one that had been inspired by the sunsets with Sarah. But this time, as he played, he wasn't thinking about the past. He was thinking about the present, about the afternoons he had spent at this very piano, teaching Samantha, watching her transform from a cold businesswoman into a passionate and vulnerable woman. The music that emerged was different this time. It was still melancholic, but there was something else: hope, possibility, the promising pain of a heart that dares to love again. When he finished, the silence that followed was absolute. For a moment that felt eternal, no one moved. Then slowly the applause began. Not the polite applause of high society, but genuine emotional applause, the kind of recognition James hadn't heard in years. He stood up, bowed, and automatically looked for Samantha's face. He found her standing by the back wall, clapping with tears in her eyes. For a moment, their eyes met, and James saw something in her that made him feel like he could fly. But the moment was interrupted when a man approached him. He was tall, distinguished, with perfectly styled grey hair and a suit that probably cost more than James's car. "Incredible performance, young man," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Jones, president of Jones Industries. I have to ask you, would you be available to play at my wife's charity gala next month? I'm sure we can come to a very satisfactory financial arrangement." Before James could respond, other guests began to approach, all with similar offers, all interested in renting his talent for their own social events. He found himself surrounded by people who saw him as an interesting novelty, a redemption story they could use to impress their own social circles. "How much would it cost to have him for a private dinner?" asked an older woman with jewels that sparkled like Christmas lights. "Does he play popular music too, or just classical?" another man wanted to know. "How dramatic is his tragedy story exactly? My guests love a good drama." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. Over the past few weeks working with Samantha, he had begun to remember why he loved music. He had found passion again, purpose, the emotional connection that made playing more than just pressing keys in the right order. But now, listening to these conversations, he realized that to these people he wasn't a musician. He was a product, a curiosity, a sad story they could buy for their guests' entertainment. "Excuse me," he murmured, trying to get away from the group that had formed around him. "I need some fresh air." He managed to escape to the terrace, where the night air of New York offered a welcome relief from the claustrophobic heat of unwanted attention. The city lights stretched out below him like a sea of terrestrial stars, and for a moment he could breathe again. "James?" Samantha's soft voice came from behind him. He turned to find her standing in the doorway of the terrace, her blue dress shining under the moonlight. There was something in her expression that he couldn't quite read. "Are you okay?" she asked, walking toward him. "I'm fine," he lied. "I just needed a moment." "The guests are very impressed. Robert Jones told me your performance was absolutely extraordinary." James laughed without humor. "Yes, so extraordinary that he wants to rent me for his wife's charity gala. Apparently, I'm exactly the type of tragic entertainment their social circles appreciate." Samantha stopped halfway to him. "James." "No," he interrupted, turning to face her completely. "Let me ask you something, Samantha. Am I really different to you than I am to them? Or am I just another sad story you can use to impress your investors?" The question hung in the air between them like an accusation. James saw something that might have been pain cross Samantha's face, but her expression quickly hardened. "How can you ask me that?" Her voice had an edge he hadn't heard in weeks. "After everything we've shared, how can you think I see you that way?" "Oh, really?" James felt all the frustration and confusion of the past few weeks well up inside him. "Then explain to me why we never talk about what's happening between us. Explain to me why every time we get too close you find an excuse to pull away. Explain to me why I'm good enough to teach you piano and play for your guests, but apparently not good enough for anything else." Samantha took a step back as if he had slapped her. "You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I?" James stepped closer to her, his green eyes burning with an intensity that made her take another step back. "Then tell me, Samantha, tell me what I am to you. Am I your employee, your charity project, your trained pet? Because frankly, I have no idea anymore." "You're—" Samantha began, but her words died in her throat. "I'm what?" Silence stretched between them, charged with everything that hadn't been said, with all the glances they had shared, with all the moments their hands had accidentally touched during the piano lessons. "I can't do this," Samantha murmured finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Do what? Be honest? Admit there's something between us? Admit that I'm falling in love with you." The confession exploded from her like a cry of pain. "Admit that for the first time in my life, there's someone I care about more than my company, more than my money, more than my reputation. Is that what you want to hear?" James stood paralyzed. Of all the answers he had expected, that had not been one of them. "Samantha." "No." She raised a hand to stop him, tears running freely down her cheeks. "Don't say anything. You can't say anything because this can't happen. It can't work." "Why not?" "Because look where we are." She gestured to the mansion behind them, to the city lights below. "Look at all this. This is my world, James. A world where everything is bought and sold, where people are used as stepping stones to get higher, where love is just another business transaction. That's not true, isn't it?" Her laugh was bitter. "My last boyfriend proposed to me at a business dinner, in front of his partners, because he thought marrying me would give him access to my network of contacts. My best friend from college tried to sell information about my expansion plans to my biggest competitor. My own uncle tried to force me out of the presidency of my company last year. James felt something break in his chest at the sight of the pain in her eyes. In my world, Samantha continued, people like you, genuine, talented people who love for love's sake and not for profit, don't survive. They are devoured, used, destroyed. And I'm not going to be the one to do that to you. What if I'm willing to take that risk? I'm not. Samantha's voice broke completely. I can't watch you turn into what everyone else turns into when they get close to me. I can't watch for the moment you realize you can get more from me than you actually feel for me. I can't. She couldn't finish the sentence. She turned to the railing of the terrace, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. James approached her slowly, as if he were approaching a wounded animal. When he put his hands on her shoulders, she didn't pull away, but she didn't turn to him either. Samantha, he said softly, look at me. Slowly she turned around. Her makeup was ruined, her eyes red and swollen, but to James she had never been more beautiful. In this moment of complete vulnerability, he was seeing the real woman behind all the masks. Never, he said, looking her directly in the eyes. I would never do that to you. I swear on the memory of my wife, on everything that is sacred to me, that I would never see you as something to use or exploit. How can you be sure? How can anyone be sure? Because, James raised his hands to gently cup her face, because for the past 3 weeks, I've had the opportunity to do exactly that. I could have played with your feelings. I could have taken advantage of your vulnerability during the piano lessons. I could have used your attraction to me to secure more contracts, more money, more opportunities. Samantha looked at him without blinking, hanging on his every word. But the only thing I've wanted, he continued, the only thing I've been able to think about is protecting you, about making you smile the way you smiled the first time you played Claire de Lune all the way through, about being the man who sees the real woman behind the power and wealth and loves her for exactly who she is. For a moment, time was suspended between them. The sounds of the party inside faded, the city lights blurred, and they existed only in a bubble of possibility and fear. Slowly, very slowly, James leaned in toward her. Samantha didn't pull away. Her eyes closed, and when their lips met, it was as if the whole world rearranged itself around them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, full of all the emotion they had been suppressing for weeks, but then it deepened, became desperate, as if they were trying to communicate years of loneliness and longing in a single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I don't know how to do this, Samantha whispered against his lips. Do what? Love someone. Trust someone. Be vulnerable with someone. James pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against his. No one knows how to do that. You learn as you go. What if I mess it all up? What if I mess it all up? He countered. What if my emotional baggage is too heavy? What if I can never love you the way you deserve to be loved, because a part of my heart will always belong to a woman who is gone? Samantha looked him in the eyes. Is that how you feel? James considered the question carefully. At first I thought so. I thought I could never love anyone else the way I loved Sarah. But with you it's different. It's not less intense, but it's different. As if my heart has found a new way to beat. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Samantha murmured. You're the strongest woman I know. You took control of an empire at 23. You survived family betrayals and heartbreak and still found a way to be vulnerable enough to learn piano. Believe me, you are strong enough. Samantha laughed softly, though tears still glistened in her eyes. Do you know you're the first person in years who hasn't asked me for anything? Not money, not connections, not business favors. You've just given me things. Patience, teaching, music. Do you know you're the first person in years who has made me want to be better than I am? Not for money or fame, but because you deserve someone who is worthy of you. They looked at each other, and James could see the exact moment Samantha made the decision to be brave. Okay, she said, her voice firm despite the tears. Let's try, but slowly and privately, at least for now. Why privately? Samantha looked toward the house, where the lights and voices of the party continued. Because once people know, everything will change. The media, the competitors, even our families, everyone will have opinions about what this means. And I want to have time to figure out what it means for us before the whole world gets involved. James nodded, understanding the wisdom of that. Then we'll do it your way, at our pace. At our pace, Samantha agreed. They kissed again, this kiss filled with promises and possibilities. When they broke apart, Samantha took his hand. We should go back inside, she said. The guests are going to wonder where we are. In a moment, James said, not wanting to break the intimacy of the moment. Just let me look at you a little longer. I want to remember this moment exactly as it is. Samantha smiled, And it was that smile, genuine, hopeful, full of nascent love, that James knew he would remember for the rest of his life. When they finally returned to the party, no one seemed to notice that something had changed between them, but James could feel the difference in every fiber of his being. When Samantha gave him a smile from across the room, when their hands accidentally brushed as she introduced him to another guest, when he heard her talk about him with a pride that went beyond professional satisfaction, James knew that his life had changed irrevocably. He had no idea of the challenges they would face, of the forces that would try to tear them apart, of the secrets that still had to be revealed. He only knew that for the first time in 3 years, he felt alive, hopeful, and absolutely terrified in the best possible way. As he played one last piece to close the night, Claire de Lune, in honor of the woman who had stolen his heart and the mother she had loved, James realized that he was playing not just for the audience but for Samantha. Every note was a declaration of love, every chord a promise that, no matter what came, they would find a way to make this music work. When the last note faded into silence and the applause filled the room, James looked for Samantha's eyes one last time. She was standing at the back of the room, clapping with tears in her eyes, and on her face he saw all the future they had decided to build together. But he also saw in the shadow by the door a figure he didn't recognize, a tall man in an expensive suit, watching the scene with an expression that made something cold settle in James's stomach. When he looked again, the figure had disappeared, and James wondered if he had imagined it. But the feeling of unease remained, like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. Who was that man, and what did he want with Samantha? The answer to that question would change everything. Chapter 4. The days following the event at the Taylor house passed in a kind of enchanted limbo for James. Officially, nothing had changed. He still arrived at the mansion every morning to rehearse and give piano lessons to Samantha, but everything was different now. Every shared glance carried the weight of the confessions of that night on the terrace. Every accidental brush of their hands felt like pure electricity, and the silences between them were charged with everything they wanted to say, but didn't dare, at least not while Carmen or other employees were nearby. Samantha had kept her word about keeping their relationship private. During work hours, she was professional to the point of being almost cold, but James had learned to recognize the small signs, the way her fingers lingered on the keys when he corrected her posture, how her eyes sought his when she thought no one was watching, the almost imperceptible smile that appeared on her face when he played the melodies they had practiced together. It was a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks before the Newport event, when the bubble of discreet happiness they had been living in finally burst. James had arrived early, as always, and found Samantha already waiting for him in the music room. But something was different. Her posture was rigid, and she had an expression on her face that he hadn't seen since the first days of knowing her, cold, distant, almost hostile. "Good morning," James said, putting his briefcase down by the piano. "Are you ready to work on the second movement of the Rachmaninoff concerto?" Samantha didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed him a manila folder she had been holding. "Before we start on that," she said, her voice cutting, "I think you should explain this to me." James opened the folder and felt as if the world tilted under his feet. Inside were photographs, him leaving the Taylor mansion, him and Samantha on the terrace the night of the event, taken with a telephoto lens from somewhere in the gardens. The images were grainy but unmistakable, especially one where the moment they had kissed was clearly visible. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They arrived by messenger this morning. No return address." Samantha walked to the window, turning her back to him. Along with a very interesting note, she handed him a sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant, clearly educated, but the message was pure venom. "Dear Samantha, I thought you'd like to know that your new employee has been very busy researching your personal life. Have you wondered how he knew exactly how to approach you? How he knew your daily routine? Did he happen to mention he was hired to get information about your Pacific Coast expansion plans? Some old friends pay very well for that kind of information." A concerned friend. James felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. "Samantha, this is a lie. I don't know who wrote this, but it's a complete lie." "Oh, really?" She turned to him, and the coldness in her eyes hit him like a slap. "Then explain to me how you knew I was going to be at the Hilton Grand Central that day. Explain to me how you knew I needed a pianist. Explain the incredible coincidence that just as my favorite music academy was being foreclosed on, you would appear with exactly the talent I needed." "Samantha, listen to me." "No." Her voice broke, and James could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. "I knew this would happen. I knew it was too good to be true, but I was stupid because for the first time in my life I wanted to believe that someone could love me for who I am and not for what I have. I do love you for who you are. James took a step toward her, but Samantha backed away. Oh yeah? Then why didn't you tell me that Jonathan Parker hired you? The name hit James like a punch to the stomach. Jonathan Parker, her ex-fiancé, the man who had broken off their engagement last year when he realized he would never be more important to Samantha than her company. How do you know about Jonathan? Because he himself confirmed it to me an hour ago. Samantha laughed bitterly. He called me to warn me about your true loyalty. Apparently he was the one who paid you to get close to me, to get information about my hotel expansion plans. James felt the world fall apart around him. Samantha, please let me explain. Yes, Jonathan contacted me, but it's not what you think. It's not what I think. Her voice rose in volume. So he didn't pay you to spy on me? Yes, but I didn't accept. James ran to her, taking her hands before she could pull away. He contacted me 2 months ago after the accident. He offered me money to get close to you, to get information about your business plans, but I told him no. I told him I would never do something like that. But you took the cleaning job at my hotel. Because I needed the money. Because I was desperate to save my grandmother's academy. But I never ever had any intention of spying on you or hurting you. Samantha looked him in the eyes, and for a moment, James thought there was hope. But then her expression hardened again. How can I believe you? How can I believe anything you tell me when you hid something so important from me? Because I didn't want this exact thing to happen, James said desperately. Because I knew if I told you, you would think exactly what you're thinking now. Because I was afraid of losing you before we had a chance to be something real. Something real? Samantha laughed bitterly. What part of this has been real, James? The piano lessons where you accidentally touched me, the intimate conversations about our pasts, the kiss on the terrace. All of it, James shouted, his control finally breaking. Every second, every word, every glance. Yes, Jonathan contacted me, but from the moment I really saw you, not just as a rich boss, but as a woman who was learning to be vulnerable, I knew I could never hurt you. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me. The words hung in the air between them, like an accusation that James couldn't refute. She was right. He hadn't trusted her enough to be completely honest from the beginning. You're right, he said finally, letting go of her hands. I should have told you. And the fact that I didn't, I guess that tells you everything you need to know about what kind of man I really am. Samantha looked at him for a long moment, tears running silently down her cheeks. I need you to go, Samantha. I need you to leave now. Her voice broke completely. I can't look at you right now. I can't think clearly when you're here. James nodded slowly, understanding that he had lost the right to argue. What about the Newport event? I'll find another pianist. And the contract, the money you lent me for the academy. Consider the contract terminated. The money, she shrugged, consider it a parting gift. I don't want your money as a parting gift, James said firmly. I will find a way to pay you back every penny. Do whatever you want, Samantha murmured, turning to the window again. Just go, please. James picked up his briefcase and walked toward the door. On the threshold, he stopped and turned one last time. For what it's worth, he said softly, every word I said to you about my feelings was true. Every single one. Samantha didn't respond, but James saw her shoulders shake with silent sobs. He left the mansion feeling as if he had died inside. His car refused to start on the first try, then the second, and when the engine finally came to life, James hit the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles bled. It wasn't until he got to his small apartment in downtown New York that the full reality of what he had lost hit him. He had not only lost Samantha, he had lost the passion he had rediscovered for music, the hope for a different future, the possibility of being loved by an extraordinary woman. But more than that, he had lost the respect of the only person whose opinion had come to matter to him more than his own. His phone rang, interrupting his self-destructive thoughts. It was a number he didn't recognize. James Anderson? The voice was male, refined, slightly condescending. Yes, this is Jonathan Parker. I think you know who I am. James felt a cold and dangerous anger run through his veins. What do you want? I want to congratulate you. You did an excellent job. I didn't do any work for you. Ah, but you did. James could hear the smile in Jonathan's voice. Do you really think it was a coincidence that Samantha showed up at the hotel just when you were there? Do you really think it was a coincidence that she knew exactly who you were? James's stomach sank. What are you talking about? I told one of her assistants that there was a talented pianist working in the hotel's housekeeping. I made sure she knew your story. I planted the seed that made her want to rescue you. Why? Because I knew Samantha well enough to know she couldn't resist a charity project, especially one that made her feel like a savior. Jonathan's laugh was cruel. Did you really think a woman like her would fall in love with a man like you on her own merit? Every word was like a knife in James's chest. You're a sick man. I'm a businessman. And thanks to your little romance, I got exactly what I needed. Detailed information about Samantha's expansion plans in Newport. The conversations you had with her about the event, the names of the investors, the specific locations, all of that was very valuable for my own hotel plans in the region. I didn't give you any information. Not consciously, perhaps, but walls have ears, especially when those walls belong to employees who can be bought. Jonathan paused. Carmen has been very helpful in that regard. James felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Carmen, who had been so kind to him, who had shared coffee and conversations in the mornings, how could you do this? Very easily. Samantha has always been too trusting, too willing to believe the best in people. It's what makes her vulnerable. It's what makes her weak. She's not weak, James said through gritted teeth. She's brave, braver than you'll ever be. Brave? Jonathan laughed. Did you see her this morning? Did you see her fall apart the moment I questioned your motives? That's not bravery, James. That's fragility. Go to hell. I'm already here, my friend, and now you are too. Jonathan hung up. James threw the phone against the wall, where it shattered into pieces, but the destruction of the device did nothing to relieve the fury and pain he felt inside. He realized that Jonathan was right about one thing. He had been used, but not in the way Samantha thought. He had been used by Jonathan to hurt the woman he loved. Everything, from the first meeting to the photographs this morning, had been orchestrated by a man who couldn't bear to see Samantha happy with someone else. The question was, how could he make Samantha see the truth when he wasn't even sure she wanted to hear it? The answer came to him 3 days later, when Carmen appeared at his door. The older woman looked terrible. Red eyes, a haggard face, as if she hadn't slept in days. James let her in, although every instinct screamed not to trust her. I know you have no reason to believe me, Carmen began without preamble, but I need to tell you something. About Jonathan. About what really happened. James studied her carefully. Why should I listen to you? Weren't you the one who gave him information about Samantha and me? Carmen collapsed into a chair, as if the weight of guilt was too much to bear. Yes, but I didn't know. I didn't understand what he planned to do with that information. What do you mean? Jonathan contacted me 2 months ago. He said he was worried about Samantha, that he had heard rumors that someone might be trying to get close to her to take advantage of her. He asked me to keep an eye out to report anything suspicious. James felt a mix of anger and pity. And you thought I was suspicious? At first, yes. A handsome, talented man who appears out of nowhere just when Samantha is most vulnerable. It seemed too convenient. Carmen looked up and James saw tears in her eyes. But after the first few weeks, I realized I was wrong. I saw how you looked at her, how she looked at you. I saw how you both changed during those piano lessons. Then why did you keep reporting to Jonathan? Because he threatened me. Carmen's voice broke. He has compromising photographs of my son. My son is gay, and although I fully accept him, he still doesn't feel ready for it to be public. Jonathan said that if I didn't keep cooperating, he would make sure those photographs appeared in all the city's newspapers. James felt anger consume him. What kind of man does that? A man who lost the woman he thought belonged to him, Carmen murmured. When Samantha broke off their engagement, he became obsessive. He hired private investigators to follow her, hacked her email, bribed some of her employees, all because he couldn't accept that she didn't love him. Why are you telling me this now? Carmen looked him directly in the eyes. Because Samantha hasn't left her room in 3 days. She doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep, she just cries. And because when I went to clean the music room this morning, I found her sitting at the piano trying to play Claire de Lune, with hands trembling so much she couldn't press the keys correctly. The image broke James's heart in two. What do you want me to do? She won't listen to me. And frankly, I'm not sure I have the right to ask her to. You have to find a way, Carmen insisted, because if you don't, Jonathan will win. He'll destroy Samantha, and then he'll go on with his life as if nothing happened. What about the photographs of your son? Carmen smiled sadly. My son is stronger than I thought. When I told him the whole situation, he told me he would rather face the consequences of living honestly than continue to be an accomplice to someone else's pain. James nodded slowly, feeling a renewed respect for the woman who had been playing an impossible role in a situation that should never have existed. What can I do? She thinks it was all a lie from the beginning. Show her it wasn't, Carmen said simply. Find a way to prove that your feelings were real. How? Carmen got up to leave, but at the door, she stopped. The Newport event is tomorrow. Samantha cancelled everything. The pianist, the special arrangements, even some of the guests. She's planning to just have a simple dinner with some boring business speeches. And And I think it would be a shame if the piano that has been waiting in the hotel's main lobby wasn't played by someone who truly understands what music means to her. With that cryptic clue, Carmen left, leaving James with a decision to make and less than 24 hours to make it. That night, James didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at his apartment's old upright piano, the same one he had learned to play on as a child, and composed. The notes flowed from him like tears, like prayers, like love letters he could never deliver in person. He composed a piece that told his whole story: the loss of Sarah, the despair of the past 3 years, the moment he first saw Samantha, the afternoons in the music room learning to love each other through piano lessons, the terror of losing her, and finally, the desperate hope that love could be stronger than fear and mistrust. When he finished, the sun was already rising. He had 12 hours to get to Newport, 12 hours to orchestrate the most important gesture of his life, 12 hours to prove that sometimes music can say what words cannot. He had no idea if it would work. He had no idea if Samantha would be willing to listen. But he knew he had to try because a life without her wasn't a life worth living. And because, for the first time since he had met Samantha, he was going to be completely honest about everything. Chapter 5. The Taylor Hotel Newport stood like a modern jewel against the backdrop of the Atlantic Ocean, with its elegant architectural lines that combined contemporary design with traditional New England elements. The 15-story building seemed to emerge from the sea itself. The suites had panoramic views of Narragansett Bay, and the main lobby, where the grand opening event would be held, had glass walls that opened completely to the tropical gardens and the hotel's private beach. James arrived in Newport on a midnight bus, with only a backpack, his laptop, and a determination that bordered on desperation. He had no invitation, no money for a hotel room, and no idea how he was going to accomplish what he had set out to do. But he had a musical composition he had written with his heart's blood, and a blind faith that love sometimes could open doors that logic kept closed. His first stop was the hotel itself. It was barely 6 in the morning, and the event was scheduled for 8 at night. 12 hours to make a miracle happen. The hotel lobby was exactly as spectacular as he had imagined. The grand piano, a Steinway Model D that probably cost more than James's house, was located in the center of the space, surrounded by floral arrangements of white orchids and fuchsia bougainvillea. Preparations for the event were in full swing. Uniformed waiters were setting elegant tables, sound technicians were testing microphones, and event coordinators were supervising every detail with the military precision that characterized any event organized by Samantha. James approached the reception desk, where a young woman with a perfect professional smile greeted him. "Good morning. Welcome to the Taylor Hotel Newport. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Ms. Samantha Taylor. It's urgent." The receptionist's smile hardened slightly. "Do you have a scheduled appointment? Ms. Taylor is very busy with the grand opening preparations." "I don't have an appointment, but—" James hesitated, then decided to bet on honesty. "I'm James Anderson. I was the pianist who was going to play tonight before there was a misunderstanding." The receptionist looked at him with new eyes, clearly recognizing the name. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back office, and James could hear a muffled but intense conversation. When she returned, her expression was uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but Ms. Taylor is not available. If you'd like, I can take a message." "Is she here at the hotel?" "Yes, but then I'll wait." "Sir, I don't think that's—" "I'll wait," James repeated firmly, walking toward one of the elegant chairs in the lobby. "I have all day." Over the next 4 hours, James became part of the hotel's furniture. He saw the catering staff arrive, the florists making last-minute adjustments, the technicians calibrating the sound system. He saw Carmen arrive, who gave him a discreet smile but didn't approach, clearly aware that she was being watched. It was 11 in the morning when he finally saw Samantha. She came down the private elevator dressed in a navy blue business suit that accentuated her eyes, her hair pulled back in a flawless bun. But even from a distance, James could see the dark circles that no makeup could completely hide. She was accompanied by 2 assistants and was heading directly for the hotel's back exit, clearly trying to avoid the main lobby. "Samantha!" James got up from his chair, his voice cutting through the space. She stopped abruptly, her shoulders tensing. She turned slowly, and when her eyes met his, James saw a flash of pain so intense it almost made him recoil. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was cold, but James could hear the fatigue beneath the coolness. "I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about." She started to walk away again. "Jonathan used me as much as he used you." The words came out of James's mouth louder than he had planned, making several heads turn toward them. Samantha stopped again, but she didn't turn around. He orchestrated everything, James continued, walking toward her slowly. From the beginning, your coincidental appearance at the hotel, your knowledge of my story, he planted all of that. Why should I believe you? Samantha murmured, finally turning to him. Up close, he could see she had been crying. Because Carmen confirmed it to me. Because Jonathan called me to gloat about what he had done. Because I have proof. James took out his phone. He had bought a new one after smashing the old one, and showed her the recordings of Jonathan's calls that he had managed to capture with the help of a sound technician friend. Samantha listened in silence, her face paling with each revelation. When the recording ended, she stood still for a long moment. This doesn't change the fact that you lied to me, she said finally, that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning. You're right, James put away the phone. I didn't trust you, and that was my failing. But I didn't trust you because I was afraid of losing you, not because I was going to betray you. What's the difference? The difference is that a man who wants to betray you doesn't stay up all night writing music that tells the story of how he fell in love with you. James took one more step closer. The difference is that a man who wants to use you doesn't give up everything he has to try and win back your trust. Samantha looked at him with curiosity, despite her pain. What are you talking about? I'm talking about tonight, the grand opening event. Let me play for you, Samantha. Not for your guests, not for your business, but for you. Let me play the music I wrote, to explain everything I couldn't say with words. I already hired another pianist. Cancel him, James. One song, he said desperately. Give me the chance to play one song, and if after that you still think it was all a lie, I'll leave and never bother you again. Samantha studied him for what felt like an eternity. James could see the internal battle in her eyes, the desire to believe fighting against the fear of being hurt again. One song, she said finally, but after the official program. And if you give me any reason to regret this, I won't, James promised. You better not. Samantha walked away, but before disappearing into the elevator, she turned one last time. James? Yes? The music you wrote, does it really tell our story? Every note. She nodded once, and then disappeared behind the elevator doors. The next 8 hours were the longest of James's life. Without a hotel room, he spent the day walking on the beach, mentally rehearsing the piece he had composed, preparing for what might be the most important performance of his life. At 6 in the evening, he returned to the hotel to find the lobby transformed into an elegant concert and dinner hall. The tables were perfectly arranged, the lighting was soft and romantic, and the piano gleamed under the lights like an altar awaiting a sacrifice. Guests began to arrive at 7. Businessmen, investors, local celebrities, politicians, all dressed with the elegance that only old American money can buy. James had changed into his only decent suit in the lobby bathroom, and now he waited in a discreet corner, observing the social choreography of the event. Samantha appeared at 8 o'clock sharp, and James felt his breath catch. She was wearing a long emerald green dress that matched her eyes, and her hair fell in soft waves over her bare shoulders. She moved through the room with the grace of a queen, greeting each guest, smiling at the appropriate moments, but James could see the tension in her movements, the way her eyes sought the piano occasionally. The dinner went off without a hitch. The speeches were as expected. Investments, economic growth, the future of tourism in Newport. The hired pianist, an older man with impeccable technique but no soul, played popular classical pieces that served as elegant but forgettable background music. When the desserts were served and the official speeches were over, Samantha rose from her table in the center of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, her clear voice cut through the conversations, before we end this evening, we have a special surprise. James felt his heart race. Tonight, Samantha continued, we have the opportunity to hear from an extraordinary pianist, someone who has played not only the keys of a piano, but also the strings of the human heart. Her eyes found James across the room, and in them, he saw a mixture of hope and terror that was probably reflected in his own. Please join me in welcoming James Anderson. The applause was polite but curious as James walked to the piano. When he sat on the bench, the room filled with a palpable expectation. He put his hands on the keys, closed his eyes, and began to play. The music that emerged was unlike anything the guests had heard before at an event like this. It wasn't a well-known classical piece. It wasn't elegant background music. It was a musical conversation, a confession in notes and chords, a love story told in the only language James knew completely. It began soft, melancholic, telling the story of a man who had lost everything. The minor chords spoke of pain, of mourning, of years lost in darkness, but gradually the music began to change. New melodies appeared, brighter, more hopeful, speaking of an unexpected encounter, of a woman who had rekindled the light in a heart that was believed to be extinguished forever. As the piece progressed, James opened his eyes and looked for Samantha. She was sitting at her table, tears running silently down her cheeks but not taking her eyes off him. In her eyes, James saw recognition. She understood what the music was saying. The central section of the composition was the most complex, with the two hands playing intertwined melodies that represented their souls learning to dance together. The chords spoke of piano lessons, of hands that accidentally touched, of shared glances, of a kiss on a terrace under the stars. But then came the most painful part, the dissonant chords that represented the betrayal, the misunderstanding, the separation. The music became chaotic, angry, filled with the pain of two hearts that were moving away when they needed each other most. And finally, the resolution. The chords softened, unified, finding a harmony that was more beautiful for having survived the discord. The final melody was simple but profound, speaking of a love that had learned to be brave, that had chosen trust over fear, that had decided that some risks were worth taking. When the last note faded into silence, the room remained in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly the applause began. Not the polite applause of high society, but genuine emotional applause from people who had been touched by something real and beautiful. But James only had eyes for Samantha. She had gotten up from her table and was walking toward him, tears running freely down her face, but with a smile that completely transformed her face. When she reached the piano, James stood up to meet her. "Did you understand what I was saying?" he asked softly. "Every word," she murmured, "every note." And, instead of answering with words, Samantha walked to him and kissed him, in front of all the guests, in front of the press who had come to cover the event, in front of the whole world. It was a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, of renewed hope, of love that had found a way to survive its own fear. When they separated, the guests erupted in applause and cheers. But for James and Samantha, the rest of the world had vanished. There was only the two of them, the music that still resonated in the air, and the promise of a future they would build together. "How did you know I would say yes?" James asked, smiling through his own tears. "Because," Samantha said, cupping his face in her hands, "because someone who can write music like that, someone who can open their heart like that in front of the whole world, can't be anything but genuine." "I love you," James said, the words coming out like a prayer. "I love you too," Samantha replied, "and this time I'm going to trust that." They kissed again, and in that kiss was all the promise of the years to come, the challenges they would face, the joys they would share, the music they would create together. But first, there was one more secret that needed to be revealed, one that would change everything they thought they knew about their story. Chapter 6. 3 months after the Newport event, James and Samantha had established a routine that worked for them. He had returned to playing professionally, not only at social events but in real concerts, rediscovering the passion he had believed lost forever. Samantha had opened a music scholarship program through her foundation, funding music academies in low-income communities throughout New York. The media had dubbed them the couple of the year, but more importantly than that, they had learned to navigate the complex reality of loving someone in public. It was a Saturday morning in January when the call came. James was in the kitchen of the Taylor mansion, making coffee, a tradition they had developed on weekends, when they had no professional obligations and could pretend to be a normal couple, when he heard Samantha's phone ring from the music room. "James!" Samantha's voice had an urgency that made him drop the coffee pot and run to her. He found her sitting at the piano, the phone in one hand, and an expression of absolute shock on her face. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "It was Michael Taylor," Samantha murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "My cousin. He lives in New York, but we never talked much since my father passed away. What did he want?" "He wanted to tell me something about my father, something I never knew." Samantha looked at him with eyes that gleamed with unshed tears. "James, there's something you didn't know about my family, something that changes everything." James felt a premonitory chill. "What is it?" "My father wasn't just a hotelier. Before inheriting the business from my grandfather, he was—" She paused as if the words were difficult to say. "He was a musician, a pianist, specifically." James frowned. "Why would that change anything?" "Because, according to Michael, my father studied at the National Conservatory of Music in the 80s, and one of his best friends, one of his most talented classmates, was a young pianist named Edward Anderson." The name hit James like lightning. "Edward Anderson was my father." "I know," Samantha whispered. "Michael told me that your father and mine were inseparable during their years of study. They were like brothers. They competed against each other, but also motivated each other to be better." James sat down heavily on the piano bench next to her. My father never talked much about his student years. I only knew that he had studied music before. Before what? Before my mother got pregnant with me, and he decided that music wasn't a stable enough career to support a family. He became an accountant and only played piano at home for us. Samantha nodded slowly. Michael says my father made the opposite choice. When my grandfather offered him to take over the hotel business, he gave up music completely to focus on business. Why is Michael telling you this now? Because he's dying. The tears finally began to fall down Samantha's cheeks. He has cancer, and he wanted to make sure someone in the family knew the full story before it was too late. Is there more? Much more. Samantha got up from the bench and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she had learned to trust in love for the first time. According to Michael, our fathers had a terrible fight just before graduating from the conservatory. About what? About a scholarship. A full scholarship to study piano in Vienna, Austria. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Only one student would be selected, and they would have the chance to study with some of the greatest masters in the world. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. Who won it? Your father. But he never went to Vienna. He never told me about any scholarship, because my father made sure he couldn't use it. Samantha turned to him, her face pale. Michael says my father knew about your mother's pregnancy before your father did, and instead of telling your father directly, he told the scholarship selection panel. What? James got up abruptly. He told the panel that Edward Anderson had unforeseen family obligations that would make it impossible for him to fulfill the terms of the scholarship. He suggested it would be more appropriate to give the scholarship to someone who could dedicate themselves completely to their studies. To someone like him. Exactly. Samantha closed her eyes, as if the words physically hurt her. Michael says my father justified what he did by telling himself he was being practical, that your father would have had to give up the scholarship anyway once you were born. But the truth is he was jealous of your father's talent, and he saw an opportunity to eliminate him from the competition. James sat down again, feeling as if he had been punched in the chest. Then your father went to Vienna. Yes, and he became a successful pianist for 2 years, until my grandfather convinced him to return to take over the family business. Samantha walked to him slowly. But here's the part that really matters, James. Michael says my father never forgave himself for what he did to yours, that guilt haunted him for the rest of his life. How can you know that? Because when he passed away, he left something for your family, something my father had asked Michael to deliver if anything happened to him, but Michael never had the courage to do it until now. Samantha took an envelope from the piano, one that James hadn't noticed before. His name was written on the front in a handwriting he didn't recognize. What is this? Open it. With trembling hands, James opened the envelope. Inside were 2 things, a letter and a check. The check was for an amount that made James feel dizzy, more money than he had ever seen in his entire life. But it was the letter that really hit him. To Edward Anderson, or in case of his death, to his family. There is no apology sufficient for what I did. I stole your opportunity to fulfill your dream because I was too cowardly to compete against you honestly. I stole your opportunity to become the pianist I knew you could be because I was afraid your talent would eclipse mine. I have lived with this guilt every day since. Every success I've had in business feels stained by the knowledge that it was built on the betrayal of my best friend. This money cannot give you back the lost years, the career you could have had, the dreams I took from you. But it is my attempt to ensure that your family never has to struggle financially in the way you struggled because of me. I also want you to know that I never stopped believing you were the most talented pianist I ever met. If there is a life after death, I hope to have the opportunity to ask for your forgiveness in person. With profound regret and respect, Robert Taylor. When James finished reading, tears ran freely down his face. They weren't tears of pain, but of something more complex. A mixture of understanding, sadness, and strangely relief. Your father felt guilty his whole life, he murmured. According to Michael, yes. Samantha sat next to him again. And there's something else. Michael says the reason my father encouraged me so much to study business instead of music wasn't just because he wanted me to take over the company. It was because he couldn't bear the thought of me following the musical path he had taken away from your father. James looked at the check again. It was enough money to save his grandmother's academy forever, to expand it, to create the music scholarships he had always dreamed of. Do you think this is a coincidence, he asked, that we would meet, fall in love, and now discover that our fathers were connected in this way? Samantha considered the question carefully. I think sometimes the universe has a very strange sense of humor. Or maybe sometimes love finds a way to heal the wounds that past generations inflicted on each other. What do we do with this? With the money? with the knowledge. What do you want to do? James looked at the letter again, then looked at Samantha. In her blue eyes he saw all the future they could build together, a future that would honor both his father's dreams and her father's need to find redemption. I want to use this money to create something beautiful, he said finally, something that would have made both of our fathers proud. What do you have in mind? A music academy that offers full scholarships to talented students, regardless of their economic situation, a place where young musicians can pursue their dreams without having to choose between art and survival. Samantha smiled, and in that smile James saw love, pride, and something else, the peace that comes from finding a purpose that is greater than oneself. The Taylor Anderson Academy, she said softly. Taylor Anderson? Our fathers never had the chance to reconcile, but we do. Samantha took his hands. We can create something together that honors both their mistakes and their dreams. James kissed her, and in that kiss was all the gratitude, love, and hope he felt. When they broke apart, he realized he had one more important question to ask. Samantha, there's something I've been wanting to ask you since Newport. What? James got off the piano bench and knelt in front of her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't an expensive ring. With his current income, he couldn't afford the kind of jewelry Samantha probably expected, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, a silver band with a small diamond that shone like a star. Samantha Taylor, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Will you marry me? Not for money, not for convenience, not because it's what's expected of us, but because I want to spend the rest of my life creating music with you, both literally and metaphorically. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course I will. When James slid the ring onto her finger, Samantha laughed through her tears. You know this ring is perfect, even though it's not as big as the one Jonathan gave you, especially because it's not as big as the one Jonathan gave me. Samantha helped him up and hugged him tightly. Jonathan gave me a ring that was a declaration of his wealth. You gave me a ring that is a declaration of your love. What's the difference? The difference, Samantha said, kissing him softly, is that one is designed to impress other people, and the other is designed to make me happy. They spent the rest of the day planning their future, the academy they would build, the wedding they wanted to have, the trips they would take together. But more than that, they spent the day talking about the kind of love they wanted to create, one based on honesty, vulnerability, and mutual faith. That night, they organized a small, intimate dinner to announce their engagement. They invited Carmen, Michael, who had come from New York to meet James, and a few close friends. There were no photographers, no press, none of the pomp that usually accompanied events in Samantha's life, just people who loved them, celebrating a love that had found a way to overcome all the odds. During dinner, Michael raised his glass to make a toast. Despite his illness, his eyes shone with joy. To James and Samantha, he said, his voice full of emotion. To a love that has shown that sometimes children can heal the wounds that parents inflicted on each other. To the music they will create together, both on the piano and in life, and to the proof that true love always finds a way. Cheers, everyone responded, and James felt his heart might burst with happiness. After the guests left, James and Samantha sat together at the piano in the music room. Samantha played Claire de Lune, no longer imperfectly, but with the confidence that comes from years of practice and love for the music. When she finished, James played the composition he had written for her in Newport, but this time he added a new ending, a brilliant and hopeful coda that spoke of all the beautiful years they had ahead of them. Do you know what I love most about our story? Samantha asked, resting her head on James's shoulder. What? That it's not a story about a rich woman who fell in love with a poor man, or about a poor man who fell in love with a rich woman. It's a story about two people who found a way to love each other, despite all the reasons the world told them they shouldn't. And what were those reasons again? James asked, kissing the top of her head. Social class, economic differences, painful pasts, fear of commitment, family pressure, social expectations. Samantha paused. The list was pretty long. And how did we overcome them? By deciding that love was more important than fear, by deciding that honesty was more important than protection, by deciding that some things are worth the risk. Even now? Even knowing how complicated it's going to be? Samantha lifted her head to look him directly in the eyes. Especially now, because now I know we can survive almost anything as long as we have each other. They kissed again, and in that kiss was all the promise of the years to come, the challenges they would face, the joys they would share, the music they would create together. A year later, the Taylor Anderson Academy opened its doors in a beautiful building in downtown New York with capacity for 200 students and world-class teachers. The inauguration ceremony was a joint concert where James and Samantha played a four-hand piece they had composed together, a piano symphony that told the story of two families, two generations, and a love that had found a way to heal past wounds. In the audience were the first scholarship recipients, young people from rural communities in New York who would otherwise never have had the opportunity to study music professionally. Their faces, shining with hope and determination, reminded James why all the pain and struggle had been worth it. After the concert, while the guests enjoyed the reception in the Academy Gardens, James and Samantha slipped away for a moment to be alone in one of the practice rooms. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked, taking his wife's hands. "Regret what?" "Choosing such a complicated life. You could have chosen anyone, someone from your own social world, someone without so much emotional baggage." Samantha smiled and kissed him softly. "You know what you told me the night we got engaged? You told me you wanted to spend the rest of your life creating music with me, both literally and metaphorically." "I remember. Well, this academy, these students, this new generation of musicians we're helping to create, this is our metaphorical music. This is the most beautiful symphony we could have composed. And the literal music, Samantha said, placing James's hands on her belly, where the curve that indicated they were expecting their first child was just beginning to show. "The literal music we'll be teaching very soon." James looked at her in amazement, then lifted her into his arms and spun her around as they both laughed with pure joy. "One more musician in the family?" he asked. "Or a businesswoman with an artist's soul?" Samantha replied. "Do you care which one it is?" "I only care that they know that love is the most beautiful music there is," James said, kissing her again. And in that moment, surrounded by the sound of students practicing in the nearby classrooms, with the New York sun filtering through the windows, and the promise of a future filled with music and love, and new generations who would learn that dreams can indeed come true, James and Samantha Taylor Anderson knew they had found not just their happy ending, but their perfect beginning. The music they had created together, both on the piano and in life, would continue to resonate for generations, a symphony of love that had shown that sometimes the best music comes from hearts that have learned to beat in unison after having been broken. And in the years that followed, when their students asked them what the secret was to creating truly beautiful music, they always gave the same answer. First, learn to love without fear. Everything else comes after.